The summer sun streamed through the large bay windows of the living room, casting a warm glow over the polished hardwood floors. Adam sat on the cream-colored couch, his laptop perched on his knees as he scrolled through emails from work. The room was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the occasional chirp of birds outside. The tranquility of the moment was a stark contrast to the unease that had been building inside him for weeks. Adam leaned back, rubbing his temples as he tried to focus on the financial reports in front of him. It wasn't like him to be distracted, especially not when it came to work. But something had been gnawing at him, a vague sense of discomfort that he couldn't quite place. He shook his head, trying to push the thoughts away, and refocused on the numbers. Across the room, a framed photo of his family caught his eye. It was from their trip to the Bahamas the previous year, a vacation filled with laughter, sun-soaked days, and lazy evenings by the ocean. Grace stood in the center of the picture, her arm around Sarah, who was grinning from ear to ear. Ethan had his arm slung over Adam's shoulder, both of them caught in the middle of a laugh. It was a perfect moment, captured in time. But lately that picture felt like a snapshot of a different life. A life before the quiet shifts and subtle changes that Adam had begun to notice in Grace. Grace was everything he had ever dreamed of in a partner. She was beautiful, with her dark, wavy hair that fell just below her shoulders, and those striking green eyes that always seemed to sparkle with life. She was intelligent, witty, and the kind of person who could light up a room just by walking into it. Adam had always admired how she effortlessly balanced being a devoted mother with her passion for yoga and teaching part-time at the local community college. They had built a life together that was the envy of many a beautiful home, 2 wonderful children, and a marriage that had weathered its fair share of storms. But lately, Adam felt like he was living with a stranger. Grace had become distant, her laughter more forced, her smiles less frequent. There were moments when she would simply stare out the window, lost in thought, a sadness in her eyes that she never shared. Adam had tried to reach out, to ask her what was wrong, but every time he did, she would brush it off with a quick smile and a reassuring, "I am fine, just tired." Tired. That had been her excuse more and more over the past few months. At first, Adam didn't think much of it. After all, they both had demanding lives. His work as a financial analyst required long hours, and Grace juggled teaching, her yoga classes, and taking care of the kids. But the excuses started piling up. Late nights out with her friends, solo weekend trips for what she called self-care, and her sudden obsession with working out. She had always been fit, but now it was as if she was training for a marathon or something. She spent hours at the gym, often coming home long after dinner, claiming she had lost track of time. Adam wanted to believe her, to trust that nothing was wrong. But the unease grew with each passing day. It wasn't just the late nights or the gym sessions. It was the way she seemed to avoid his touch, how she flinched ever so slightly when he reached for her hand. Their once passionate relationship had cooled to the point where they were more like roommates than lovers. They barely talked anymore, and when they did, it was about mundane things, bills, the kids, the grocery list. The deep, intimate conversations they used to have, the ones that had bonded them so tightly, had vanished. Even the kids had noticed. Sarah, now 15 and wise beyond her years, had asked him just the other day if everything was okay between him and Mom. Adam had smiled and reassured her, telling her not to worry. But deep down, he knew she was right to be concerned. Ethan, 12 and blissfully unaware, was still wrapped up in his world of video games and sports. But Adam worried about how all of this might affect him if things didn't get better. He had tried to dismiss his suspicions, telling himself that it was all in his head. After all, they had been married for over 15 years. They had gone through rough patches before every couple did. But this felt different. It was as if a wall had been erected between them, and no matter how hard Adam tried, he couldn't break through. The sound of the front door opening pulled Adam from his thoughts. Grace walked in, her gym bag slung over her shoulder. She was dressed in her usual workout gear, black leggings and a fitted tank top, her hair pulled back into a high ponytail. She looked radiant, the slight sheen of sweat on her skin only enhancing her natural beauty. But there was something else, too, a glow that hadn't been there before. "Hey," she said, flashing him a quick smile as she dropped her bag by the door. "Sorry I'm late. The class ran over, and I stayed to chat with a few people." "It's okay," Adam replied, closing his laptop. "I was just catching up on some emails. How was your day?" "It was good," Grace said, moving to the kitchen to pour herself a glass of water. "Busy, but good. The new routine at the gym is killer, but I am loving it." Adam watched her as she spoke, trying to read between the lines. There was a lightness in her voice that he hadn't heard in a while, but it wasn't directed at him. It was like she was excited about something or someone else. "That is great," he said, forcing a smile. "I'm glad you're enjoying it." She nodded, taking a long sip of water before turning to him. "How about you? How was your day?" Adam hesitated, debating whether to bring up his concerns, but something in her demeanor made him hold back. "Same old," he said instead. "Meetings, reports, the usual grind." Grace nodded, her attention already drifting elsewhere. She picked up her phone, scrolling through her messages with a slight smile playing on her lips. Adam's heart sank. Whoever, or whatever was on that phone had her more engaged than he did. "I am going to take a quick shower," she said, looking up at him briefly. "I'll be down in a bit." "Sure," Adam replied, watching as she disappeared up the stairs. He sat there for a moment, staring at the spot where she had stood, the unease in his chest growing heavier. Something was wrong, he knew it deep down, even if he didn't have any proof yet. But how could he confront her without sounding paranoid, without pushing her further away? As he sat there, grappling with his thoughts, the sound of laughter echoed from upstairs. It was Grace's voice, light and carefree, and for a moment, Adam allowed himself to hope that things were just fine, that maybe she really was just tired, that maybe he was reading too much into things. But as the laughter faded, replaced by the sound of running water, Adam knew that he couldn't ignore the nagging doubts any longer. Something was changing in their marriage, and if he didn't figure out what it was soon, he feared that their once perfect life would crumble beyond repair. The following days passed in a blur for Adam, a relentless cycle of work, coming home to a quiet house and staring at the ceiling late into the night, unable to sleep. Grace's behavior continued to gnaw at him, the subtle changes more glaring with each passing day. She was still kind, still attentive in her own way, but there was a distance, an invisible barrier that kept him from reaching her. It was a Tuesday evening when Adam first found the undeniable clue. He had just come home from a long day at the office, feeling more exhausted than usual. The house was empty. Grace and the kids were out. She had mentioned something about taking Sarah and Ethan to the movies after school, a midweek treat. Adam appreciated the quiet, using the time to unwind. After a quick dinner, he decided to go through some bills that had piled up on the kitchen counter. As he sorted through the mail, his eyes fell on a small, elegant envelope that stood out among the usual stack of utility bills and junk mail. The logo at the top was one he recognized immediately: the Mandarin Hotel, a luxury establishment in the heart of the city. They had celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary there, a night Adam remembered fondly. Curiosity piqued. Adam opened the envelope. Inside was a receipt, dated 2 weeks prior. It was for a weekend stay in one of the hotel's exclusive suites, along with charges for room service, a spa treatment, and dinner at the hotel's renowned rooftop restaurant. His heart skipped a beat as he scanned the details, his mind racing. "Why would Grace go to the Mandarin without telling me?" he muttered to himself, confusion mingling with the first stirrings of dread. The receipt was under her name. The same suite they had stayed in during their anniversary, one of the most expensive ones, with sweeping views of the city skyline. Adam's stomach twisted as he thought back to that weekend. Grace had told him she was visiting a friend out of town, a college friend who had recently gone through a rough breakup. It had made sense at the time. Grace was the type of person who would drop everything to help someone in need. But now, holding the receipt in his hands, Adam couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He tried to rationalize it. Perhaps the friend had surprised Grace with the stay, or maybe Grace had treated herself to a night away to de-stress. but the explanations felt thin, and the timing couldn't be ignored. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that there had been no mention of a hotel or a spa treatment when she returned. In fact, she had been unusually quiet about the entire trip, only offering vague details about her friend S' situation. Adam stood there in the kitchen, the receipt trembling slightly in his hand. He felt a cold sweat forming on his brow as a horrible possibility began to form in his mind. No, he told himself, shaking his head. Grace wouldn't do that. Not to him, not to their family. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it refused to be ignored. Later that evening, after Grace and the kids returned, Adam couldn't help but watch her more closely. She was cheerful, laughing at something Ethan said about the movie they had seen. Her voice was light, her smile as bright as ever, but Adam saw the way her eyes flicked towards him, almost nervously, as if she could sense his scrutiny. "Everything okay?" Grace asked as she sat down beside him on the couch after the kids had gone to bed. She had a glass of wine in hand, something she did more often these days, a little ritual she had developed to unwind. "Yeah," Adam replied, forcing a smile. He didn't want to confront her, not yet, not until he knew more. But the tension was there, just beneath the surface, a palpable unease that he knew she could feel. "Long day at work?" she asked, taking a sip of her wine. "Yeah, you could say that," Adam said, keeping his tone casual. "How was your day?" "Oh, the usual," Grace said, her eyes drifting to the TV. "Took the kids out, did some grocery shopping, went to the gym, just the regular stuff." Adam nodded, his mind racing. He wanted to ask her about the receipt, to demand answers, but he wasn't ready. Instead, he leaned back on the couch, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as they settled in to watch a movie. Grace leaned into him, resting her head on his chest, and for a moment everything felt normal. But Adam's thoughts were elsewhere, turning over the possibilities, each one more painful than the last. The next day, Adam couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The receipt had been the first tangible evidence that things weren't as they seemed, and now his mind was spinning, replaying every interaction with Grace over the past few months. He thought about her sudden late nights, the mysterious phone calls she always took in another room, the way she had started locking her phone when she never used to before. The more he dwelled on it, the more certain he became that he needed answers. By the end of the week, Adam had made up his mind. He couldn't let this gnaw at him any longer. He needed to know the truth, but he wasn't sure how to go about it. Confronting Grace outright could lead to a fight, or worse, a denial that left him feeling more lost than before. He needed proof, something undeniable that would either confirm his worst fears or put them to rest. After work, Adam found himself dialing the number of a private investigator he had heard about through a colleague. It wasn't a call he ever imagined making, but as he listened to the phone ring, he knew it was necessary. If there was something going on, he needed to know he owed it to himself and to their children. "Good evening. This is Thomas Langley," a deep voice answered on the other end of the line. "How can I help you?" Adam hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "Mr. Langley, my name is Adam. I was given your number by a friend. I think my wife might be having an affair." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Langley's voice softened. "I'm sorry to hear that, Adam. It's never an easy situation to be in. Why don't you tell me a bit more about what's been going on?" Over the next half hour, Adam laid everything out: Grace's recent behavior, the weekend trips, the strange receipt from the Mandarin Hotel. Langley listened attentively, asking a few questions here and there, but mostly letting Adam talk. By the time Adam finished, he felt a strange sense of relief, as if sharing his suspicions had lifted a weight off his shoulders, even if only slightly. "I can look into this for you," Langley said after a moment of consideration. "Discreetly, of course. I'll need a few details: her schedule, places she frequents, things like that. And if you have any other information that might help, like phone records or messages, that would be useful too." Adam agreed, setting up a time to meet with Langley the next day. As he hung up the phone, he felt a mixture of dread and determination. This wasn't a path he wanted to go down, but he knew he couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. Whatever the outcome, he needed to know the truth. The following days were a blur of anxiety and anticipation as Adam waited for Langley's report. He went through the motions at work, barely able to concentrate, his mind always drifting back to Grace. At home, he continued to play the part of the loving husband, though every interaction with Grace felt like walking on eggshells. She hadn't given him any reason to doubt her further, if anything. She seemed more affectionate, more engaged, as if sensing his growing distance. But that only made him more suspicious. It was a week later when Langley called. Adam had just returned home from work, the house quiet as Grace was out with the kids. He answered on the first ring, his heart pounding in his chest. "Adam, it's Langley," the investigator said, his tone professional yet sympathetic. "I have some information for you. Are you somewhere private where we can talk?" Adam swallowed hard, moving to his study and closing the door behind him. "Yes, I am alone. What did you find?" Langley hesitated for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "I am sorry to say that your suspicions were correct. Your wife has been meeting with a man named Luke Shepard. He's a fitness instructor at a local gym, the same one where she's been spending a lot of time. They've met several times over the past few weeks, including a weekend stay at the Mandarin Hotel." Adam's vision blurred as the words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had been expecting it, but hearing it confirmed felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. He sank into the chair behind his desk, trying to steady his breathing. "I have photos, timestamps, and receipts," Langley continued, his voice gentle. "I've put together a detailed report. I can email it to you, or we can meet in person to go over it." Adam closed his eyes, the reality of the situation crashing down on him. Grace, his Grace, had been unfaithful. The woman he had built his life with, the mother of his children, had betrayed him in the worst way possible. He felt a surge of anger, a raw, burning rage that made his hands tremble. But underneath it was a deep, soul-crushing sadness, a grief for the life they had built and the trust that had been shattered. "Email it to me," Adam said after a long pause, his voice hoarse. I need some time to process this." "Of course," Langley said softly. "Take your time, Adam. If you need anything else, don't hesitate to reach out." Adam thanked him and hung up, staring blankly at the phone in his hand. He sat there for what felt like hours, the house around him eerily silent, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. The evidence he had asked for was on its way, but Adam already knew what it would contain. The details didn't matter. What mattered was that his life, the life he had cherished, was over. Nothing would ever be the same again. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the neighborhood in shades of twilight as Adam sat in his study, staring at the email from Thomas Langley. The document remained unopened, its presence on his screen a looming specter of the truth he wasn't ready to face. His heart pounded in his chest, a steady, relentless thud that echoed the turmoil inside him. Grace was in the living room, watching television with the kids. He could hear their muffled laughter through the closed door, a sound that would have normally brought him comfort. But now it only intensified the ache in his chest. How could she sit there, laughing and playing with their children, knowing what she had done? How could she look him in the eye every day, knowing she had betrayed him? Adam's fingers hovered over the mouse, his breath catching in his throat as he finally clicked on the email. The document opened slowly, the wheel on the screen turning as if it were reluctant to reveal its contents. When the file finally loaded, Adam forced himself to look. The report was thorough, just as Langley had promised. It detailed everything: dates, times, locations, even photographs that showed Grace and Luke together, their interactions too close, too familiar to be anything but intimate. The Mandarin Hotel, the gym, even a few parks where they had met in secret. It was all there, laid out in cold, hard facts that left no room for doubt. As Adam scrolled through the report, his anger flared, hot and consuming. The images burned into his mind: Grace smiling at Luke, laughing with him, her hand resting on his arm. They looked happy, carefree, as if they were the ones with a life built on love and trust. The sight of her in those photos, the woman he had loved for so many years, made his stomach churn with a mix of rage and disgust. But it was the final pages that broke him. There, in the last section of the report, was a record of their weekend at the Mandarin, the same suite where Adam and Grace had celebrated their anniversary, where they had once toasted to a future full of promise. Seeing it now, knowing what had happened there, twisted the knife that had been lodged in his heart. His vision blurred as he scrolled through the final image, a photo of Grace and Luke walking hand in hand out of the hotel, their faces alight with smiles. It was the last nail in the coffin of his marriage, the final confirmation that everything he had believed in was a lie. Adam closed the document and leaned back in his chair, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes as if to block out the images. He felt hollow, like the life had been drained out of him. The woman he had devoted his life to, the mother of his children, had betrayed him in the most profound way possible. For a moment he considered staying silent, burying the knowledge deep inside and pretending he had never seen the report. But that thought was fleeting, washed away by a surge of anger so intense it nearly took his breath away. No, he could not let this go. He couldn't live with the lie. Grace needed to know that he was aware of her betrayal, and she needed to face the consequences of her actions. With a newfound resolve, Adam stood up and made his way to the living room. The kids were still watching TV, oblivious to the storm brewing within their father. Grace was sitting on the couch, her feet tucked under her as she sipped a glass of wine. She looked so peaceful, so content, that it made Adam's blood boil. "Hey, kids," Adam said, forcing a smile as he entered the room. "Why don't you both head upstairs and get ready for bed? I need to talk to your mom." Sarah, always perceptive, looked up at him with a curious expression. "Is everything okay, Dad?" Adam's smile faltered, but he kept his tone light. "Everything is fine, sweetheart. Just some grown-up stuff we need to discuss." Ethan, more interested in his video game than the tension in the room, shrugged and headed for the stairs. Sarah lingered for a moment, her eyes flicking between her parents before following her brother. As soon as they were out of earshot, Adam turned to Grace, who was watching him with a puzzled expression. "What is going on, Adam? You are acting strange." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the fireplace, staring at the family photos that lined the mantel. Their wedding day, the kids' first birthdays, vacations filled with laughter and love, all of it now tainted by the knowledge of what she had done. "Adam?" Grace's voice was uncertain, a touch of concern creeping into her tone. He took a deep breath, turning to face her. "I know about Luke." The color drained from Grace's face, her eyes widening in shock. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. What are you talking about?" Grace finally managed to stammer, her voice trembling. "Don T," Adam said sharply, his anger flaring again. "Don T lied to me, Grace. I know everything. The hotel, the gym, the weekend trips. I know about all of it." Grace's eyes filled with tears, her hand flying to her mouth as if to hold back a sob. "Adam, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never meant for this to happen. It was a mistake, a horrible, stupid mistake." Adam felt his chest tighten, his anger mixing with a deep, overwhelming sadness. "A mistake?" he repeated, his voice cold. "A mistake is something that happens once, Grace. This wasn't a mistake, this was a choice. You chose to betray me. You chose to lie to me and to our children. How long has this been going on?" Grace shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't know, a few months. It just happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It just happened," Adam repeated, his voice dripping with bitterness. "That's your excuse? That's supposed to make this okay?" "No," Grace sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "Nothing can make this okay, I know that. I am so sorry, Adam. I've ruined everything." Adam watched her cry, the woman he had loved for so many years now reduced to a sobbing mess on their living room couch. He had always imagined that if this day ever came, he would be angry, that he would scream and yell and demand answers. But now, standing here, all he felt was an overwhelming sense of loss. "I don't understand," Adam said quietly, his voice cracking. Why, Grace? Why did you do this? Grace looked up at him, her face pale and tear-streaked. I don't know, she whispered. I was lonely, Adam. You were always working, always busy. I felt like you didn't see me anymore, like I was just there. And then Luke came along, and he made me feel alive again. But it was wrong, Adam. I know that now. I knew it then, too, but I couldn't stop. Adam clenched his fists, trying to keep his voice steady. So this is my fault then? Because I was working to provide for our family? Because I trusted you enough to think you wouldn't betray me? No, Grace cried, shaking her head. No, Adam, it is not your fault. It's mine. I take full responsibility for what I did. I should have come to you, talked to you about how I was feeling, but I didn't, and now I've destroyed everything. The room fell into a heavy silence, the only sound Grace's quiet sobs. Adam felt like he was drowning, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. I want you to leave, Adam said finally, his voice hollow. Pack a bag and go. I need time to think. Grace's eyes widened in panic. No, Adam, please, she begged, reaching out to him. Let's talk about this, please. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. I don't want to lose you. Adam stepped back, out of her reach. You should have thought of that before, Grace. Before you destroyed our family. Now go. Grace hesitated for a moment, as if hoping he would change his mind. But when Adam didn't move, she finally stood, her hands trembling as she wiped away her tears. Without another word, she turned and walked up the stairs to their bedroom, leaving Adam alone in the living room. He stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where she had been sitting. The house was eerily silent now, the laughter of their children a distant memory. He had always believed that they could get through anything together, that their love was strong enough to weather any storm. But now, all of that seemed like a cruel joke. As he listened to the sound of Grace moving around upstairs, Adam felt a deep, crushing emptiness settle over him. The life they had built together was over, shattered by the weight of her betrayal. And as much as he wanted to believe that they could fix it, deep down he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The silence in the house was deafening after Grace left. Adam sat alone in the living room, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly in the otherwise quiet room, each second stretching out into an eternity. He felt numb, as if the confrontation had drained him of all feeling, leaving behind only a hollow shell. He had told Grace to leave, but now that she was gone, the emptiness she left behind was overwhelming. Adam stared at the family photos on the wall, the smiling faces of his children, the happy memories frozen in time. How had it all gone so wrong? How had the life they had built together crumbled so easily? His thoughts were a jumbled mess, a chaotic swirl of anger, sorrow, and confusion. He kept replaying the confrontation in his mind, hearing Grace's broken apologies, seeing the tears streaming down her face. Part of him wanted to believe her, to take her back and pretend that none of this had ever happened. But the other part, the rational part, knew that things could never be the same. The realization that his marriage was over hit him like a ton of bricks, and he slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. The tears came then, hot and uncontrollable, a release of all the pain and frustration that had been building inside him. He had always prided himself on being strong, on being able to handle anything life threw at him. But this was too much. He didn't know how long he sat there, the tears flowing freely as the weight of his shattered life bore down on him. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the loss of everything he had believed in, everything he had worked so hard to build. His marriage, his family, the life they had created together, it was all gone, slipping through his fingers like sand. After what felt like hours, the tears finally subsided, leaving him feeling drained and empty. Adam wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and took a deep, shuddering breath. He knew he needed to pull himself together, to figure out what to do next, but the thought of facing the reality of his situation was almost too much to bear. Just as he was gathering the strength to stand up, he heard a soft knock on the door. Adam froze, his heart leaping into his throat. Who could it be? Grace wouldn't have come back so soon, would she? The idea of facing her again so soon after their confrontation made his stomach churn. "Dad?" The sound of his daughter's voice made Adam's breath catch in his throat. He hadn't heard her come down the stairs, too lost in his own grief to notice. Sarah stood in the doorway to the living room, her face a mask of concern. Her eyes, so much like Grace's, were wide with worry. Adam quickly wiped away the remnants of his tears, trying to compose himself. "Sarah, sweetheart, what are you doing up?" She took a tentative step into the room, her gaze never leaving his face. "I heard you and Mom talking. It sounded serious." Adam's heart ached as he looked at her, his beautiful, perceptive daughter. She was too smart, too sensitive to miss the tension that had been building in their home over the past few months. He had hoped to shield her from the worst of it, but now it seemed that was no longer possible. He patted the seat next to him on the couch, his voice soft. "Come here, honey." Sarah hesitated for a moment before crossing the room and sitting down beside him. She curled her legs up under her, just as Grace had done earlier, and looked up at him with those wide, questioning eyes. "Is everything okay, Dad?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adam struggled to find the right words, knowing that whatever he said would change her world forever. He didn't want to burden her with the truth, not yet, but he also knew he couldn't lie to her. She deserved to know what was going on, at least in some way. "Your mom and I were going through a tough time right now," Adam began, choosing his words carefully. "We had a disagreement and she's going to stay somewhere else for a little while." Sarah's brow furrowed, her expression a mix of confusion and fear. "You mean she is leaving?" Adam's throat tightened, and he had to force the words out. "Just for a little while. We both need some time to think things through." Sarah looked down at her hands, picking at the edge of the couch cushion. "Is it because of me and Ethan? Did we do something wrong?" Adam's heart broke at the sight of her distress. He reached out, gently tilting her chin up so she would look at him. "No, sweetheart, this has nothing to do with you or Ethan. You both have been wonderful. This is between your mom and me. We just need some time to figure things out." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, and she bit her lip, trying to hold them back. Are you going to get a divorce?" The word hit Adam like a physical blow, the finality of it sinking deep into his chest. He didn't want to lie to her, but the truth was too painful to acknowledge, even to himself. "I don't know, Sarah," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I really don't know." Sarah's shoulders shook as the first tear slipped down her cheek. Adam pulled her into his arms, holding her close as she cried. The weight of the situation settled heavily on him, the realization that his daughter was suffering just as much as he was. He had wanted to protect her, to keep her safe from the pain that was tearing him apart, but now it was clear that there was no escaping it. As he held Sarah, stroking her hair and whispering words of comfort, Adam's mind raced. How had it come to this? How had their once perfect life fallen apart so completely? He had always believed that he and Grace could get through anything, that their love was strong enough to withstand any challenge. But now, as he listened to his daughter's sobs, he wondered if that belief had been nothing more than a naive illusion. After what felt like an eternity, Sarah's sobs began to subside, her breathing slowing as she calmed down. Adam continued to hold her, his own tears silently falling as he tried to offer her the comfort he could no longer find for himself. "Dad," Sarah whispered, her voice muffled against his chest. "I don't want you and Mom to break up. I don't want our family to change." Adam's heart twisted at her words, the raw pain in her voice cutting through him like a knife. He tightened his arms around her, wishing he could make everything right again, but knowing deep down that it was beyond his control. "I don't want that either, sweetheart," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "But sometimes things happen that we can't control. We just have to do our best to get through them." Sarah pulled back slightly, looking up at him with tear-streaked cheeks. "Do you still love Mom?" The question caught Adam off guard, and for a moment, he didn't know how to answer. Did he still love Grace? The thought of her betrayal filled him with anger and sadness, but beneath it all, There was still a part of him that remembered the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman he had built a life with. But that love had been tainted, twisted by the lies and deceit that had torn them apart. I don't know, Sarah, Adam admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I want to, but things are different now. Everything has changed. Sarah looked down, her fingers twisting in the fabric of his shirt. I just want things to go back to the way they were. Adam sighed, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. I know, sweetheart, I know, but sometimes we can go back. We can only move forward no matter how hard it is. Sarah didn't say anything, but Adam could see the fear and uncertainty in her eyes. She was too young to fully understand what was happening, but old enough to know that their lives would never be the same. It was a painful realization, one that Adam knew she would carry with her for the rest of her life. As the evening wore on, Adam managed to coax Sarah back upstairs, helping her get ready for bed. He tucked her in, pressing a kiss to her forehead and whispering words of comfort that felt hollow in his mouth. She clung to him, not wanting to let go, and Adam stayed with her until she finally drifted off to sleep, her breathing soft and steady in the quiet room. When he finally left her room, Adam felt utterly drained, both physically and emotionally. He made his way back to the living room, collapsing onto the couch as the weight of the evening pressed down on him. The silence in the house was oppressive, the absence of Grace S.'s presence a constant reminder of the shattered life they had once shared. His thoughts turned to Ethan, who had gone to bed without questioning anything. Adam knew that Ethan would feel the impact of their separation just as deeply as Sarah, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. The thought of his son, who still looked up to him with innocent eyes, filled Adam with a deep sense of guilt. He had failed his children, failed to protect them from the pain that was now tearing their family apart. As the night stretched on, Adam found himself lost in memories of his life with Grace, the early days of their relationship, the joy of their wedding day, the birth of their children. Those memories, once so precious, now felt like a cruel joke, taunting him with the promise of a future that would never be. He had always believed that their love was unbreakable, that they could get through anything as long as they had each other. But now, as he sat alone in the dark, Adam realized just how fragile that love had been, how easily it had crumbled under the weight of betrayal. Adam knew that he had to make a decision about what to do next. He couldn't continue to live in this limbo, caught between the past and the future, unable to move forward. But the thought of what that decision might mean, of the finality it would bring, filled him with a deep, aching sorrow. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, Adam made his way to the window, staring out at the world beyond. The neighborhood was still and quiet, the early morning light casting long shadows across the lawn. It was a new day, a new beginning, but Adam felt no comfort in it. Instead, he felt the weight of all that had been lost and all that was yet to come. For the first time since discovering Grace S.'s betrayal, Adam allowed himself to acknowledge the truth: their marriage was over. The love they had shared, the life they had built, it was all gone, destroyed by the choices they had made. And as much as he wanted to believe that they could find a way back to each other, deep down, Adam knew that there was no going back. With a heavy heart, Adam turned away from the window and made his way to the kitchen. The house was still silent, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. As he poured himself a glass of water, Adam realized that he was standing at a crossroads. The path ahead was unclear, but he knew that he had to keep moving forward, no matter how difficult it might be. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: he could no longer live in the past. It was time to make a choice, to take control of his life and his future, for himself and for his children. And as he stood there in the quiet kitchen, Adam made a silent vow to himself: no matter what happened next, he would find a way to rebuild his life, piece by piece, until he could stand strong again. The first step would be the hardest, but it was a step he knew he had to take. And with that resolve, Adam felt a small flicker of hope ignite within him, a tiny, fragile flame that would guide him through the darkness towards whatever lay ahead. The following morning dawned with a sense of clarity that Adam hadn't felt in days. The air was crisp, the sunlight streaming through the windows with an almost blinding brightness, as if the world was determined to move on even if he wasn't ready. The events of the previous night lingered in his mind like a bad dream, but the resolve he had found in the early hours remained steady, a quiet determination that pushed him to face the inevitable. Adam moved through the motions of the morning with a calm that belied the storm inside him. He made breakfast for the kids, offering them a reassuring smile when they glanced at him with wary eyes. Sarah was subdued, her usual chatter replaced by silence, while Ethan seemed to sense the tension but didn't know how to address it. Adam felt a pang of guilt as he watched them, knowing that their world was about to be turned upside down. "Are you taking us to school today, Dad?" Ethan asked, looking up from his bowl of cereal. Adam nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, buddy, I've got some time before work, so I'll drop you off." Ethan grinned, seemingly satisfied with the answer, but Sarah continued to watch him with a pensive expression. She hadn't asked about Grace that morning, but Adam could see the questions in her eyes. He wasn't ready to give her the answers she sought, not yet, but he knew he couldn't keep the truth from her forever. After breakfast, Adam helped the kids gather their things and walked them out to the car. The drive to school was uneventful, the usual morning chatter replaced by a heavy silence that Adam didn't know how to break. When they arrived at the school, Ethan hopped out of the car with a quick wave, but Sarah lingered, her hand on the door handle as she looked back at her father. "Will you be okay, Dad?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with concern. Adam's chest tightened at the question, but he managed to keep his expression neutral. "I'll be fine, sweetheart. Don't to worry about me, okay? Just focus on your day." Sarah hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Okay. I love you, Dad." "I love you too, Sarah," Adam replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Have a good day." She smiled faintly and slipped out of the car, her shoulders hunched as she joined the stream of students heading into the school. Adam watched her go, the weight of her concern adding to the burden he already carried. He had always been the strong one, the one his children looked up to for guidance and stability. But now, he felt like he was barely holding on, a fragile thread keeping him tethered to the life he had known. As he drove away from the school, Adam's thoughts turned to what needed to be done. He had spent the night thinking, going over every possible scenario, every decision he could make. The pain of Grace's betrayal still cut deep, but the anger that had once consumed him had settled into a cold resolve. He knew what he had to do. His first stop was at his office, where he called in a favor from David, his best friend and confidant. David had been a rock for Adam through the years, the one person he could always count on for advice and support. If anyone could help him navigate the next steps, it was David. They met at a quiet cafe near the office, a place they had frequented over the years during lunch breaks and after work. David was already there when Adam arrived, his usual warm smile replaced by a look of concern as he saw the expression on Adam's face. "Adam," David said, as Adam sat down across from him, "you look like hell. What is going on?" Adam took a deep breath, the weight of the past few days pressing down on him as he began to speak. "It's over, David. Grace, she's been having an affair." David's eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find the words. "What? Adam, I'm so sorry. I didn't see that coming. Are you okay?" Adam shook his head, his voice thick with emotion. "No, I am not okay. I don't think I've been okay since I found out. But I need to be. For the kids, for myself, I need to figure out what to do next." David leaned forward, his expression serious. "What are you thinking? Have you talked to her?" "I confronted her last night," Adam admitted, his hands clenching into fists as he recalled the confrontation. "She admitted to everything. She begged for forgiveness, but I don't think I can give it. I told her to leave. I needed space to think." David nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "And now? And now I think I have to end it, David. I don't see any other way forward. She destroyed everything we had, and I don't know if I can ever trust her again." David was silent for a moment, his gaze thoughtful as he studied his friend. "If that's what you need to do, then you have to do it. But it's not going to be easy, Adam. Divorce is messy, especially with kids involved. I know, Adam said, his voice firm despite the turmoil inside him. But I can live like this. I can pretend that everything is fine when it's not. I need to move on, for my sake and for the kids. David nodded slowly, his expression resigned. Okay, if you are sure this is what you want, I'll support you every step of the way. Have you thought about a lawyer? Adam's thoughts immediately went to Rachel, the lawyer he had been considering contacting. She had a reputation for being tough but fair, someone who would fight for her clients without resorting to underhanded tactics. Adam knew he needed someone like that in his corner, someone who would help him protect his children and his assets. I have someone in mind, Adam said, his resolve strengthening with each passing moment. I'll reach out to her today. I need to get this started before I lose my nerve. David reached across the table, placing a hand on Adam's arm. You are doing the right thing, Adam. It's going to be hard, but you will get through it, and I'll be here for you no matter what. Adam managed a small, grateful smile. Thanks, David. I don't know what I'd do without you. David squeezed his arm before letting go. You won't have to find out. We'll get through this together. With a plan in mind, and David's unwavering support, Adam left the cafe feeling more focused than he had in days. The decision to end his marriage wasn't one he had taken lightly, but it was one he knew he had to make. The love he had once felt for Grace had been shattered beyond repair, and as much as it pained him to let go of the life they had built together, he knew that he couldn't move forward while holding on to the past. His next step was to contact Rachel. Adam made the call as soon as he got back to his office, his heart pounding as he waited for her to pick up. When she answered, her voice was professional, calm, exactly what he needed in that moment. Rachel Green, she said, her tone brisk but not unkind. How can I help you? Rachel, this is Adam Mitchell. I was referred to you by a colleague, David Walsh. I need to discuss a potential divorce. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and when Rachel spoke again, her tone was softer, more sympathetic. I'm sorry to hear that, Adam. Why don't you come by my office this afternoon and we can go over everything in detail? I'll do everything I can to help you through this. Adam agreed, setting up the appointment before hanging up the phone. As he sat at his desk, his mind racing with the implications of what was to come, he felt a sense of determination take hold. The pain of Grace's betrayal was still there, a raw wound that would take time to heal, but now that he had made his decision, he felt more in control of his life than he had in weeks. That afternoon, Adam walked into Rachel's office, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like a physical force. Rachel was a tall woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put him at ease. She greeted him with a firm handshake and gestured for him to sit down. Thank you for coming in, Adam, Rachel said as she settled into her chair. Divorce is never easy, but we'll take it one step at a time. Why don't you start by telling me what's been going on? Adam spent the next hour going over everything Grace's affair, the confrontation, his decision to end the marriage. Rachel listened attentively, taking notes as he spoke, her expression thoughtful but unreadable. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping lightly on the desk. You're in a difficult situation, Adam, but it is not insurmountable, Rachel said after a moment. The first thing we need to do is gather all the necessary information, financial records, evidence of the affair, anything that will help us protect your interests. We'll also need to discuss custody arrangements for your children. Have you and Grace talked about that? Adam shook his head, the thought of discussing custody with Grace making his stomach turn. No, we haven't tea. I haven't spoken to her since last night. Rachel nodded, her expression sympathetic. That is understandable. But it's something we'll need to address sooner rather than later. The courts typically favor joint custody, but given the circumstances, we can make a case for you to have primary custody if that's what you want. I do, Adam said firmly. I want to protect my kids from this as much as possible. They've been through enough already. Rachel offered him a reassuring smile. We'll make that our priority then. I'll get started on the paperwork and we'll move forward from there. It's going to be a long process, Adam, but I promise you, we'll get through it. As Adam left Rachel's office, the weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges and heartache, But for the first time since discovering Grace's betrayal, he felt like he was taking control of his life. The decision to end his marriage hadn't been an easy one, but it was the right one, and now that he had made it, he was determined to see it through. That evening, after picking up the kids from school, Adam sat down with them in the living room. He knew that he couldn't put off the conversation any longer, that they needed to hear the truth from him before things went any further. "Sarah, Ethan," Adam began, his voice steady but soft. "There's something important I need to talk to you about." The kids looked up at him, their expressions filled with curiosity and a touch of apprehension. Sarah, ever the perceptive one, seemed to sense what was coming, her gaze flicking to her father's face as she bit her lip. "What is it, Dad?" Ethan asked, his tone innocent, unaware of the gravity of the situation. Adam took a deep breath, his heart aching at the thought of what he was about to say. "Your mom and we've decided that it's best for us to live apart for a while. We're going to get a divorce." The words hung in the air, heavy and final, as the kids stared at him in stunned silence. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, while Ethan looked up at him with wide, confused eyes. "Why?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "Why are you and Mom breaking up?" Adam struggled to find the right words, knowing that nothing he said could fully explain the situation. "Your mom and we've had some problems, things that we couldn't work out. But I want you to know that this isn't your fault. It's not because of anything you did. We both love you very much, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure you re-okay." Sarah wiped away her tears, her voice choked with emotion. "But I don't want you to get a divorce, Dad. I want things to stay the same." Adam's heart broke at her words, the pain in her voice cutting through him like a knife. "I know, sweetheart. I wish things could stay the same too. But sometimes things happen that we can change. We just have to do our best to get through them." Ethan looked down at his hands, his voice barely above a whisper. "Will we still see Mom?" Adam nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Of course you will. We'll work out a schedule so that you can spend time with both of us. We are still a family, even if we are not all living in the same house." The conversation continued, filled with tears and questions that Adam did his best to answer. It was one of the hardest things he had ever had to do, watching the pain and confusion on his children's faces as they tried to process the news. But as difficult as it was, he knew that they needed to hear it from him, that they deserved the truth, even if it was painful. As the evening wore on, Adam did his best to comfort the kids, reassuring them that he and Grace would do everything they could to make the transition as smooth as possible. It was little consolation in the face of their broken family, but it was all he could offer in that moment. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, Adam sat alone in the quiet house, the reality of what he had set in motion weighing heavily on him. The decision to end his marriage had been necessary, but it hadn't been easy, and the road ahead was still fraught with challenges. But as he sat there, staring out into the darkness, Adam knew that he had made the right choice. He had taken the first step towards rebuilding his life, and no matter how difficult the journey ahead, he was determined to see it through. For himself, for his children, and for the future that he was slowly beginning to believe was still possible. In the weeks that followed, Adam found himself navigating a new reality, one that was both daunting and strangely liberating. The decision to move forward with the divorce had set in motion a series of events that consumed his days: meetings with Rachel, discussions with Grace about custody arrangements, and the painful process of dividing their assets. It was exhausting, both physically and emotionally, but Adam felt a sense of purpose that had been absent for far too long. He had moved into the guest room of their home, giving Grace the space she needed to pack up her belongings and move out. They had agreed that she would stay with a friend temporarily until she found a more permanent place to live. The thought of her leaving the house for good filled Adam with a mix of relief and sorrow. The home they had shared for so many years was now a shell of what it once was, filled with memories that were too painful to revisit. One evening, as Adam was sorting through old photos and papers in his study, he heard a soft knock on the door. He looked up to see Grace standing in the doorway, her expression hesitant. She had been avoiding him for the most part, their interactions reduced to brief, strained conversations about logistics. But tonight, there was something different in her eyes, a vulnerability that tugged at Adam's heart despite everything. "Can I come in?" Grace asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Adam nodded, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Of course." She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her before sitting down. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of all that had happened hanging heavy between them. Adam could see the strain in her face, the exhaustion in her eyes. She had lost weight, her usually vibrant features now tinged with sadness. It was a reflection of the toll this entire ordeal had taken on both of them. "I wanted to talk to you," Grace began, her voice trembling slightly. "About everything." Adam felt a pang of apprehension, but he nodded for her to continue. "What's in your mind?" Grace took a deep breath, her hands twisting in her lap. "I know I am the one who ruined everything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I am not asking for it, but I need you to know how sorry I am, Adam, for everything." Adam's throat tightened at her words, but he remained silent, letting her speak. "I was selfish, and I was wrong," Grace continued, her voice filled with regret. "I took what we had for granted. I let my own insecurities and loneliness push me into doing something unforgivable. And now I've lost everything that mattered to me." Adam looked down at the papers on his desk, the words blurring as his emotions threatened to overwhelm him. He had heard her apologies before, had seen her tears, but this time felt different. There was a finality to her words, a sense that she had finally come to terms with the gravity of her actions. "I never wanted to hurt you," Grace whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt the kids. I thought I was just looking for something that was missing, something to fill the emptiness inside me. But all I did was destroy the life we built together." Adam felt a tear slip down his cheek, but he quickly wiped it away, unwilling to let her see how much her words affected him. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Grace," he said quietly, his voice hoarse with emotion. "What you did, it broke something in me. It broke us." Grace nodded, her own tears falling freely now. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know how much I regret what I did. I would give anything to take it back, but I can tee." The room fell into a heavy silence, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Adam stared at the floor, his heart aching with the weight of all that had been lost. He had loved Grace with every fiber of his being, had built his life around her, only to watch it all come crashing down. After a long moment, Adam finally looked up, meeting her tear-filled gaze. "I appreciate you saying that, Grace, I really do. But it doesn't change what happened. We can go back. All we can do now is move forward." Grace nodded, her shoulders slumping in resignation. "I know. I wanted you to know that I'm not going to fight you on anything. I want what is best for the kids, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this as easy as possible for them." Adam felt a mixture of relief and sadness at her words. The road ahead would be difficult, but at least they were on the same page when it came to the children. "Thank you," he said softly. "That means a lot." Grace offered him a sad smile, her eyes filled with regret. "I know I've lost your trust and I don't deserve your kindness, but I want you to know that I'm committed to doing right by the kids. They are the most important thing to me. They are the most important thing to both of us," Adam agreed, his voice steady. "And that's what we need to focus on now, making sure they re-okay, that they come out of this as unscathed as possible." Grace nodded, wiping away her tears. "I'll work with Rachel to make sure everything is fair. I don't want to make this harder than it already is." Adam appreciated her willingness to cooperate, but the sorrow in her eyes was a reminder of the love they had once shared, a love that had been tainted beyond repair. As much as he wanted to hold on to the good memories, they were overshadowed by the pain of her betrayal. "I think that's the best we can do," Adam said after a long pause. "Make sure the kids know we both love them, that this isn't their fault, and that we are still a family, even if things are different now." Grace nodded again, her expression filled with a sadness that mirrored his own. "I'll miss you, Adam," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I'll miss us." Adam felt a lump form in his throat, but he swallowed it down, refusing to let himself get lost in the emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. "I'll miss us too," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we can change what happened, Grace. We can only move forward." Grace looked down at her hands, her fingers still trembling. "I wish I could go back and do things differently, but I know that is not possible. I want you to be happy, Adam, even if it's not with me." Adam's heart ached at her words, the finality of their situation settling over him like a heavy weight. "I want you to be happy too, Grace," he said quietly. "I really do." They sat in silence for a long moment, the reality of their situation hanging heavily between them. There was no easy way to end a marriage, no simple way to untangle the lives they had built together. But as they sat there, facing the end of their relationship, Adam felt a sense of peace wash over him. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from forgiveness or reconciliation, but rather the peace that came from accepting the truth, no matter how painful it was. Eventually, Grace stood up, her movements slow and deliberate as she turned to leave. "I'll let you know when I've moved out," she said softly, her voice laced with sadness. "I'll make sure the kids have everything they need." Adam nodded, unable to find the words to say goodbye. He watched as she walked to the door, her shoulders slumped, her steps heavy. It was the last time she would leave this house as his wife, the last time they would share this space as a couple. The finality of it all hit him like a tidal wave, but he forced himself to stay composed, knowing that this was the only way forward. As the door closed behind her, Adam felt a sense of closure that he hadn't anticipated. The pain of her betrayal would always be with him, but now, for the first time, he felt like he could start to heal. The decision to end their marriage had been the hardest one he had ever made, but it was also the most necessary. It was time to move on, to rebuild his life piece by piece, and to find a new path forward. Over the next few weeks, Adam focused on his children, doing everything he could to reassure them that they were still loved, that they still had a family, even if it looked different now. He worked with Rachel to finalize the divorce, making sure that the process was as smooth as possible for everyone involved. There were moments of doubt, moments when the weight of it all threatened to pull him under, but he kept going, knowing that he had to be strong for Sarah and Ethan. The day the divorce was finalized was a quiet one. There were no dramatic courtroom scenes, no heated arguments, just a simple signing of papers that marked the official end of their marriage. As Adam left Rachel's office, the finality of it all settled over him like a heavy weight. He was no longer a husband, no longer part of a couple, but a single man with a new life ahead of him. That evening, after putting the kids to bed, Adam sat alone in the quiet house, the reality of his situation sinking in. The life he had known was over, but a new one was beginning, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of hope. It was a fragile hope, tentative and uncertain, but it was there, a small light in the darkness. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that there would be days when the pain of the past threatened to pull him under. But he also knew that he had the strength to keep going, to rebuild his life one step at a time. He had his children, his friends, and the knowledge that he had done the right thing, even when it had been the hardest choice he had ever made. As Adam sat in the quiet of his home, the weight of the past slowly began to lift, replaced by a sense of possibility. The future was uncertain, but it was also wide open, filled with the potential for new beginnings. And for the first time in a long time, Adam allowed himself to believe that he could find happiness again, that he could build a new life that was just as fulfilling as the one he had lost. It wouldn't be easy, but then again, nothing worth having ever was. And as Adam looked out into the night, he felt a sense of peace settle over him, a peace that came from knowing that he had survived the worst, and that he was strong enough to face whatever came next. With that thought in mind, Adam made a silent promise to himself and to his children. No matter what the future held, he would face it with courage and determination. He would move forward, step by step, until he had built a life that was worth living, a life filled with love, hope, and the promise of new beginnings. And as he closed his eyes, letting the peace of the night wash over him, Adam knew that he was ready to face whatever came next. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was also filled with possibility, and for the first time in a long time, he was ready to embrace it. Thank you for listening to this story. Subscribe to my channel, put a like under the video, and write a comment about how you like this story and what stories you want to hear.